The street for me is raw. It's people that make the street environment. Street photography to me is something that I really enjoy. So in these next few images, you'll see why I enjoy it, but I'll also explaining to you why I took them. These two were father and son, and I was in a street mall photographing a street parade, and they'd made these cupcakes. They were quite nice, by the way, but they were lovely people, and they were just going around handing out these cupcakes that they'd made that morning. So I call it, "Would you like some?" I seen this guy walking along. He'd had like a little lollipop type of thing, and he had this fantastic expression on his face, a face that has been lived in, and as you can see by the texture of his skin and with the black and white, it just highlights why I love street photography. And I call this one Lollipop Man. I was in an outside shopping centre in Western Sydney, and I come across this guy. Now, he wasn't homeless, as you can see. He's dressed fairly well. But why was he there? Why did he have his hand over his forehead like that, covering his eyes? I don't think it was the sun. And this tells a story, but it's an unfinished story. Why is he like that? And I've titled this image, "What Have I Done?" I call this one The Eyes. I call this one First for the Morning. As you can see on the left hand side, there's a bottle of Melbourne Bitter beer there. He just finished drinking first for the morning. Now, this guy lives rough. He lives on the streets. He lives in a hostel. I seen him walking up the street, and he was singing out to one of his mates across the road. But the thing that struck me with this image is how happy this man looks. Here's a guy that has nothing. He has nothing in his life, but look how happy he is. And that struck a chord with me. Most people that I know that seem to have everything at their disposal just don't seem to be happy most of the time. So I call this First for the Morning. This one I call Anonymous. That was the name of the cafe, but I had no idea who that man was sitting at the coffee table, having his coffee with his mobile phone. So I thought, yes, I don't know who he is. He's anonymous to me. The cafe's called Anonymous, so the image is called, obviously, Anonymous. I call this one Survival. The streets are littered with homeless people. I call them the forgotten people. People were walking past. Here's this fellow with his girlfriend or partner, all rugged up, sitting on the footpath, begging for money. But to me, the streets are raw. I don't hide it. This is street photography. This shot was taken in the heart of Canberra. Canberra has a high population of homeless people. So even our nation's capital suffers from the people doing it tough. This shot was taken in the heart of Melbourne, CBD. This guy was selling, I think it's a magazine called The View, for a few extra dollars just so he can survive. A guy living on the streets, doing it tough in Melbourne, and you couldn't pick a colder place to be homeless or living rough. But I call that, Would You Like to Buy a Copy? Another person doing it tough on the streets. I mean, street photography is raw. I personally don't hide the fact that not everybody is in a fortunate position. I call this one, Can You Spare Some Change? I call this one the catch up, just two old mates catching up over a coffee. This one was taken in Las Vegas in 2019 before COVID, and I call this Let's Take a Selfie. This particular shot was taken in King Street in Newtown, an inner city suburb of Sydney, an iconic location for street photographers. I was standing probably, 2 metres in front of this guy. He's an antique dealer, and he was on the phone to somebody. I just couldn't quite hear the conversation, but I've titled this one, your order is ready. This image was taken in the heart of Canberra CBD. These two gentlemen are sitting next to one another. They don't know one another. They're on their mobile phones, as you can see. And it just goes to show that we've actually lost the art of talking to one another as human beings. So I've entitled this one, "We Don't Talk to Each Other Anymore." I took this image in a local shopping centre in Western Sydney, actually, and I was walking around with my camera, as I usually do, street photography, and I noticed this group of Samoan men handing out leaflets. They noticed that I had a camera with me, and they came up to me and they asked me could I take their photograph, and I said certainly I would. Well, what it turned out to be, these chaps were a Samoan group, a group of singers, and they were promoting an event that they were having on the weekend. So I gladly took their images, as you can see here, and they were the most loveliest blokes. They were so gentle and so kind. I ended up getting their email addresses, and I sent the images to them. So I entitled this "The Samoan Boys." And then we have the buskers that we see on the streets. Once again, I was out on the streets, this time in another local area, and I seen this Indian gentleman. What struck me the most was his beard. It was immaculate. He had the turban and the white beard, and I went up to him and I said, "Look, sir, would you mind if I took your photograph?" And he said, "Certainly you can." I got his email address and I sent the image to him. He was a beautiful Indian man, and I call this shot immaculate. I noticed this lady, she seemed to be in a cage selling tickets, so I affectionately called this one "Let Me Out." I call this one "Peekaboo." This particular shot was taken in the inner city suburb of Glebe in Sydney, another iconic area for street photographers. This guy, obviously a biker, he knew what I was doing. He knew I had a camera, but I actually shot from the hip, and I will explain that to you, or that style of shooting from the hip, in another video. But he knew exactly what I was doing. He didn't say anything, but I think he appreciated me taking his photo, because when you look at him, he's a fairly suave sort of dude. So I call this "I'm Ready." This is an image that I did win an award with at a street photography exhibition, and it was taken in King Street, Newtown, which is an iconic location for street photographers. Now, my car was parked in front of the motorbike, and I noticed this motorbike reversing with two people, a male and his female companion. I just had a feeling something was going to happen here. So I raised the camera up to my eye and I took this shot. As you can see, the girl is standing on the footpath and the boyfriend or partner is standing on the road. I have no idea what they were talking to one another about. I couldn't hear them because they had helmets on, of course, but I just knew something was going to happen, and that's exactly what happened. They were talking to one another, and I actually call this shot "The Decisive Moment." And with street photography, it's all about being observant. So this is the decisive moment. I call this one "You Have to Listen to What I'm Saying." Owners and their pets make great subjects. I noticed this dog was sitting there looking at her owner having some breakfast, and I've called this "Please Feed Me." This particular shot was taken in Las Vegas in 2019. Now, with all the glitz and glamour and money that is seen and thrown around in Las Vegas, it does have another side to it. This fellow, obviously homeless, doing it tough. What struck me the most was his two different shoes he was wearing. So in amongst all the glitz and glamour, there is an underside to Las Vegas. Back on the streets of inner city Sydney, everybody would like to meet Eric. Eric was once a businessman. He had a good home, a loving family and a good job. But unfortunately he succumbed to the ravages of drugs and alcohol, which led him down the path of living on the streets. So for the grace of God goes all of us. Please remember people like Eric. I call this a life once lived.